screen share again. So yes, the event will be recorded. So if any of you don't want yourselves to be public property, then switch your video off and you won't be seen. Just to say that in addition to it being recorded, I'll do a blog to follow on from this event, which I'll put up on my website, and I'll link from that to wherever we managed to get the video hosted. This is very much a discussion-based event, so it's not just about a chat and a question and answer. It's hopefully a discussion which will involve everybody who's here. We will, however, start off by having a short presentation by Tim and Marilyn Lana, who live at Hollygarth Passive House in Harrogate. You can wave their arms around a bit just to make sure people know where they are. There they are. We also have in the room Peter Huxford and Margot Brown from Derwent Road Passive House in York. So Peter and Margot, if you're there, if you want to flap your arms around a bit as well, then people know who you are. And that's their rather wonderful house in the background there. And Tim and JJ Shepherd from Hobmore Passive House in York. Again, Tim, if you want to wave your arms around a bit there, then people will know where you are. And I'm actually next door to Tim and JJ. It's in what is not a passive house, but is a fairly kind of drastic retrofit of a Victorian end terraced house with a couple of extensions on the side of it. So that's us lot. If you haven't done so already, then please say hello in the chat box and just put a few words about yourself and what your interest is in today and whereabouts you are. And also, if you, as we go along, if you get questions or comments, even if you get to say them, please pop them in the chat box, because it then gives me a kind of prompt to make sure that stuff gets written up when I do the blog afterwards. Okay, so I will now stop sharing and I will hand over the hosting to Tim and Marilyn so that they can then do the presentation, and do feel free to unmute yourself as well.
We're muted now.
We have an exciting pause here while the technical things happen there. There we go. We have no sound here, Tim, so I think you might need to unmute yourself just in case.
There. This is part 2 of the story. Towards the end of the earlier video, Tim uttered the phrase, "This house oozes well-being." That rather lazy summary conveniently expressed how he felt about living here. But what did he really mean? In what ways does a home engender well-being, and how has our quality of life improved as a result of living in a passive house? This methodology diagram illustrates how Passive House combines aims, principles, and implementation. There are clear hints of well-being within the aim section: high comfort, healthy indoor climate, and lasting quality all get a mention. So it's unhelpful to think of Passive House purely in energy saving terms, as we once did. Also, it's a framework rather than a straitjacket. The design requirements combine rigor with flexibility so they don't stifle the designer's creativity. And the Passive House standard embraces the whole construction process, thus assuring quality delivery. Most sites will enable a passive house. No site is perfect, but a compact building with an attractive, broadly south-facing aspect makes achieving a passive house a lot easier. We finally found a site that readily facilitated a passive house, as well as sitting in a good surroundings next to an area of woodland. We were able to have our main living spaces facing away from the road and the driveway. Our brief considered both current and our future needs, and we were confident that we could achieve a cost-effective passive house. We now realize that we have achieved well-being through good design without directly seeking it. Bill's initial thoughts for mapping and external appearance were very much to our taste, and we focused our attention on the internal design and windows. He refers to us as being bold in his blog article, but perhaps our boldness brought the best out of him. Design of the internal space is fundamental to well-being. We deliberately designed for possible future disabilities and grasped the opportunity for large south-facing living spaces on both floors. Our higher than standard ceilings add to the spacious feel and link us to our garden and the woods. Winter sunshine floods our living rooms, so we feel warmed as well as being warm. In the summer, we expand our living area into the patio, eat outdoors, and prevent our house from becoming overheated by setting up a thermal stack. We've economized on space elsewhere in the house, but we have great space where we spend our waking hours. It feels like living in luxury. Even though our main bedroom is part of the northern frontage, we get an amazing view from our east-facing window each morning as we gently emerge from sleep, a luxurious privilege of our third age. We view our local woodland area, watch the sunrise, and observe the seasonal shift day by day. Finally, we maximize our living space by making a feature of our oak staircase within it. We took the view that doors are only needed for privacy and sound containment. Passive house means you don't need small spaces to feel cozy. These brief comments don't do full justice to Phil's skills, but we hope they illustrate the way in which design enhances our well-being, both now and into the future. So the first site, then the design, and now the passive house standards. Passive house brings draft-free living, comfort, not just warmth. We choose to sit next to our windows, enjoying the natural world and the changing seasons because it's so comfortable to do so. The house is so quiet, nothing moves or creaks. Triple glazing provides sound as well as heat insulation. Life generally feels very calm here, even when it isn't. We enjoy clean, warmed, fresh air. Temperature and humidity are constant. There are no cooking smells, steam, or condensation. Less housework is the icing on the cake. So, all in all, a real and multifaceted sense of well-being. Here's a summary of ways to ensure that your passive house delivers on well-being, giving you a space you enjoy living in, a reduced impact on the natural environment through low energy consumption, a strong sense of living in harmony with the natural world outside. We are definitely living well.
It's nice one, that, isn't it?
Excellent. Thank you both. All right, Tim, if you can hand me back hosting, that'd be brilliant. Meantime, any questions immediately for Tim and Marilyn on their place? If you use the Sorry, go
Are
ahead.
we using the chat or?
Go for it. I think you might as well just use the straightforward business of talking at me. So, Kate.
We're just in the initial stages. We've got a pre-application in, and it's all quite new to us, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
And I suppose is there anything that you wish you'd have done? It all seems to work well, but is there a couple of key things where you think, oh, I wish I'd have incorporated this, or
I think there's always loads of things that you feel I could have done that better. I once heard somebody say it takes 3 self-builds to get it about right, and most of us don't have that luxury. But as Marilyn kept saying to me, 70% is a first-class honours. So I think you have to be prepared that you make hundreds and hundreds of individual decisions and you won't get them all precisely right. I think the key is to get good professional advice alongside you, and encourage your advisors to challenge you all the time, and not view it as criticism, just view it as 3 heads are better than 1.
Oh, yeah, that's really useful. Yeah, thank you.
Any others specifically? Richard, you're muted.
How's that?
Got it.
No, just want to make a comment. I think congratulations are due to both Tim and Marilyn, and also the architect, because the appearance of the building of the house is not like passive houses used to be, which was sort of very, very functional. This actually is a much more domestic feel to it, apart from the south elevation where you've got the shading and so on. I think that works really well. So congratulations all around.
Thank you. It's probably, we're kind of bopping around about the issues around kind of design. So what I'll do is I'll jump straight onto a quick bit of screen sharing and a very quick kind of bit, which was comments from me really about the kind of the way the architect or designer gets involved in the passive house process. So if I just stick this on screen for you, if you can see that, then that would be great. So yeah, it's kind of a bit about, I mean, some architects work with separate passive house consultants. Some do the training and become passive house designers themselves. So there are different ways that architects work on passive house projects. Is it like, I've heard it described as kind of similar to the relationship with structural engineers. It's a specialist thing. Passive house design is a specialist area. Is that something where architects work with separate people, or is there merit in bringing the skills more tightly into the design process? And I guess my line on that is that yes, it is. PHPP and PHPP is the passive house design software, which is effectively a massively large Excel spreadsheet. And the passive house design process gives you lots of numbers, and it kind of really does deal with very accurate prediction about how the buildings will behave, but how does it enable a designer to use creativity in the design process to ensure well-being? For me, the things that Passive House makes me do as a designer is, first of all, to think about glazing, the orientation of glazing and where the sun is. Glazing becomes a resource which you use wisely rather than simply kind of peppering it around in order to get a bit of interest on every elevation. You think much more about where you want glazing to be, because you're more able to work out what's happening with it in terms of sunlight and daylight into the building, and the resultant heat losses that you get through the areas of glazing, and indeed the solar gain that you get through areas of glazing.
As a resource.
The second thing I would say is that if you are able to combine passive house design with using 3D design and visualization tools, then you get a much better prediction of the actual experience of the buildings. So when I'm doing design work, I have my CAD software open on screen for the design process. I have PHPP software on screen in order to transfer numbers across to think about the thermal performance of the building. And I have a visualization package called Enscape, which then gives me a kind of walkthrough showing where sun comes into the building, where it falls, and what the views out from the building are like, which gives you a kind of very complete view then about what the building is shaping up to do and how it's shaping up to be. I think what Passivhaus enables you to do as a designer is to think much more about the links between inside and outside, so that you can do things like thinking about window seats, which work really well. If you've got triple glazed windows, you can sit close to them, and I know that some of the people in the room have got experience of that. Living spaces which, like Tim and Marilyn's, link between the inside and the outside. Lots of glass into areas like living and dining spaces, provided it's suitably shaded or suitably orientated, to enable you to kind of really link to garden space or to wild space outside, and doing things like putting beds beneath windows so that you can pull the curtains back or roll the blind up and wake up with the dawn if you want to, without ending up in a crick in your neck because you've got cold air coming off the windows onto you. There's also, and Tim and Marilyn mentioned it in their presentation, the issue that because space is more usable, you can actually design smaller spaces which still provide really good living space, but you don't have to provide kind of buffers in order to keep yourself away from windows or keep yourself away from other openings or keep yourself away from doors. And the space is always usable because you don't end up with this situation where your head's nice and warm, your feet are freezing cold. The whole of the space becomes more usable. There's also, certainly in Northern Europe, where passive house basically means mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, the issue about designing a house where you have controlled ventilation so that you've got filtered incoming air, so you've got a lower level of pollutants, lower level of pollen, lower level of stuff coming in, particularly from urban settings. You've got constant background ventilation, so you don't get build-up of smells within the building. Occupants' activity has very little impact on it. If you decide to burn some toast, then that disappears very quickly. If you decide to leap on the turbo trainer in your office, as I do, thankfully that disappears fairly quickly too. But then there are also some challenges involved in that. And one of the issues, which is always an interesting one, is where you have very, very even temperatures throughout the whole of the house, how do you deal with the fact that people might want a living space at maybe 21, 22 degrees, might want the bedrooms at 18 or 19 degrees. So that's one to ponder. That's that. So does that give a bit of kind of comment really in terms of how picking up on the points from the earlier conversation about how do architects and designers work within that process, and does that kind of prompt some questions? Got a question about the glazing percentage. Jamie, do you want to say anything more about that?
Yes, hello. I just was looking at the beautiful picture. Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Yep, got you.
Yes, okay. So I was just looking at the beautiful picture that they shared of their home, and I saw that they had some lovely big windows that were overlooking their view. And I just wanted to know if they had information to share about what their glazing percentage was.
Right, I'm just calling
for that view.
I'm just calling out PHPP, so I'll tell you in a moment. Here we go. So yes, right, hold on. So right, the whole house, they've got there's about 40 square meters of glazing over the whole thing, and about 25 square meters that is on that south side. So the vast majority of the glazing is on that south side, and the elevation that you saw on the north side of it, with the mixture of timber cladding, two types of timber cladding, was to try and get sufficient kind of texture on that north side to make up for the fact that there's very little glazing there. So the rooms on the north side basically just give you peeps out towards the driveway and up towards the main road. But by using contrasting timber on that elevation, we managed to still get it looking okay. Peter and Margot's house likewise was one where It's got lots of glass on the south side, very much like Tim and Marilyn's. But the north side of it facing onto the street has got relatively little glazing on it. But what it does have is variety of materials on that north side to try and compensate. I will try and find an image of that just to stick on screen so that...
Can you clarify what you're meaning when you're saying a variety of materials? Are you talking about like cladding solutions, or are you talking about just actually different window sizes and so forth?
Different cladding solutions. So if I get, yeah, here's Peter and Margot. So if you hold on 1 second, I'll get that up there and then share the screen. You should better see that. So this is Peter and Margot's house, which the south side of it has enormous amounts of glass. If we can have a look around the other side of it, there we go. South side of it, lots of glass, very similar to Tim and Marilyn's in overhanging eaves on the south side, timber sun shading above the ground level windows, but big sliding doors at ground level and big sliding doors with Juliet balconies at first floor. But then on the north side of it, we ended up with a situation where, because we wanted to keep the amount of glazing right down, what we've got there is this mixture of render, vertical timber slatting, brickwork, the use of what appear to be shutters in between the windows, but which are in fact just blanking panels, but just to try and make sure that there's enough going on that north side that it doesn't feel like the comment that Richard made earlier about kind of, the kind of utilitarian rendered building with little tiny windows and nothing else going on. So that's kind of a way that we've tried to get over that challenge here.
Can I ask another question about this house here? So the slats that are going over, are they actually going over the top of the windows there? Do they move, or do they are they adjustable? They're
fixed shutters, basically vertical timber boards, so 9x2s or whatever, 50B to 5 timber slats, just designed in order to cut out summer sunshine when you don't want it coming in, but to then allow winter sunshine to come in underneath it, which I think works fairly well. Tim and Marilyn, does it work okay on yours?
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
That's good. It's one of those things where
thank you.
We had this bizarre situation in the UK many years back, and the UK residents will know this, where one of the London office buildings had been designed where it reflected the sunlight down onto a point and ended up frying cars on the street inside. And the comment from the architects was they hadn't worked out that the sun was going to do that. Which always made me laugh, because I think if you want to look for a fairly predictable thing, it's generally the sun. So it's fairly straightforward to design that kind of shading to get the geometry so that you do kind of cut out overheating problem, but still allow the sun to come in underneath it if you want it to. So, yeah.
There we go. Just one comment again on solar gain. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Passivhaus has moved into city centres like New York and Vienna and so on. So there you don't have the option often to actually take advantage of solar gain. So that's the beauty of PHPP, is you can model to actually make sure that you can meet the standards even if you can't take full advantage of gain, which is another plus. So,
yep,
so the choice of site isn't quite so important.
There's a question down here from Katerina, who's asking about new systems and finding them easy to set things up. Katerina, do you want to say anything more about that? Do unmute yourself. Okay, I'll just pass the question straight on. So the question is, how do the owners deal with new systems installed? And do they find it easy to change settings? Any of you want to have a crack at that? Tim, Peter, Margot? Peter, go for it.
You know.
Yep.
Yeah, we had one thing changed because we have the heating comes from 3 towel rails in bathrooms and cloakroom, and they're controlled from the adjacent room. So we had a timer on those originally, And we found because the air change takes a couple of hours to have its full impact, you have to kind of second guess what the weather's going to be like a little bit later on. There's continual fiddling around with that. So I think we followed Phil in his house in changing that to thermostat controls, and that works a lot better. Apart from that, I'm not one of these sort of people who constantly checks everything. We just live here very quietly, and it seems to run itself very nicely. So we don't worry too much about messing around with the controls.
Tim Shepherd, you do, don't you? You are a man who likes to kind of mess around with things. So tell us your story.
What about the?
About systems in the
house. I'm just typing to Katerina saying that there is an issue with too many different systems and trying to actually hang on to them. If I do it again, I'd make sure it was all integrated a little bit easier. And I still find it a little bit complicated at times. That's probably only because I'm interested in what's going on when the rest of the family just happy to live here. So it's not a deal breaker. It's just something that I'd like to have a little bit more awareness of. I want to know where my electricity is going. And at the moment, all I know is I'm consuming it or I'm producing it, but it's not easy to find out exactly which bit of your house is actually consuming that much power, for example. And water, for example, I still find it bizarre that I can control how much battery is being used on my laptop, but I can't actually find out how much hot water I've got left. So I have actually run out of hot water a couple of times when I've had large numbers of family members staying. And the idea that it's a 300-litre tank and I've no idea as to how much hot water is left or is in there, it just seems a bit weird to me, considering the amount of technology we've got elsewhere in the property.
I think the fundamental principle there, the daughter can drain an entire 300 litres of hot water cylinder.
Well, yeah, no,
unaided, isn't there?
But we need a warning to be able to say
that's probably
like
true.
A hooter or something. You have
Tab.
10 litres left.
Tab, you've joined us. Any thoughts from your side of things on how your place is working? Because you've got some kit in there, haven't you?
Yeah, morning everyone. I'd say we generally just leave it alone, to be honest. It sort of takes care of itself. Most of the kit we've got has apps on it. So the telephone, if you've got your mobile, you can sort of sort out the ventilation system. In even the tank, the water tank, we've got a thermal store, which basically just refreshes itself automatically. So it's effectively, again, just takes care of itself. There's not really much to do. And even, in the middle of the winter last year, we left the central heating completely off. And when we did turn it on, it was probably for about 30 minutes and the house stayed warm for the week. So in fact, that's as far as we went. So I think it just, as long as you put a little bit of forethought on what you're doing, it can take care of itself. You don't need to do much.
Brilliant, thanks, Tab. Frank, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Can I add before Frank comes in?
All right, yeah, for it.
I'm definitely a Tim, not a Peter. But I think that's you've had two completely different answers, and I think it very much depends on personality, almost, because as Phil kept telling us through the process, don't worry about it. It's it's such a small amount of money. Don't bother. We've kind of set ourselves a little challenge that we're actually, the government pays us to live here rather than we paying for our electricity. And we're just on the cusp of being zero energy costs. But it's, if we didn't, it cost us 50 quid a year or something like that, £1 a week. We enjoy the challenge of fine tuning stuff, and we're still learning. But if you want to adopt Peter's attitude of just leave it alone, it does work without being fiddled with. So, but very much personal preference, I would say.
Frank, do you want to unmute yourself? Great.
Yeah, sure. So my question, it kind of goes back to the start of Tim and Marilyn's presentation and some stuff you were talking about, Phil, and the slides you were sharing. It's kind of there's a lot of tools about assessing the performance of a building. And at the start of the presentation, it was like choose a site. Well, in our personal situation, we have a site, and we're lucky that it's reasonably large, and therefore there's different options potentially about where to place the building within it. Can the same tools that are used to assess the performance of a building be used to inform the placement of the house itself?
I guess I can kind of start on answering that and say that yes. I mean, a simple way of doing that is to stick a notional house at different points on the site, different orientations, and just start to see what the broad numbers are. In a site like yours, where you've got quite a few trees around the edge of it, you can model all that. You can start to kind of take a view on what impact that's going to have. I think, as Richard said, though, one of the things with designing from scratch is if you design the form factor of the building, so the basic shape of the building, so that you're not doing anything which is extravagant in terms of quantities of wall and roof area and floor area in relation to the internal volume you get, then solar gain becomes something you can then use to bring brightness into rooms rather than to rely upon to provide heating. So you do have a lot of flexibility, and you can, I think, rather the way Tim and Marilyn did, kind of take advantage of where you've got good views out from the building, where you've got bits of the site that put you close to trees, which gives you close views of nature. You can start to make use of that without fretting too much about sticking the house in the absolute optimum point of the site to get the southern sunshine into it. Any other thoughts from any of the rest of you about that? Or we have a question from Kenneth about building control. Kenneth, are you on there? Unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone.
Hiya.
I work in architecture in Edinburgh and I'm studying part-time, so I'm looking to become qualified next year. I want to kind of put my career into Passivhaus. So in practice, we are trying to carry on or take on some clients to do passive houses, so we haven't gotten past building control yet, well, planning. But are there any challenges in terms of getting through building control? Because obviously things are much more technical with passive house, but they also surpass all the standards we have in the UK. Would it make it easier, or is there like separate challenges to that?
There's a separate challenge from the point of view that despite PHPP being a much better piece of design software than the SAP software that we have to use in order to go through the building control process, you still have to do SAP in order to get it through the building control process. So you can end up in rather bizarre situations. And I know amongst the two Tims and Peter and Tab, we had slightly bizarre situations where the energy performance certificates that were generated through the SAP process were bizarrely different between these houses, despite them all being passive house. So I've seen passive houses going from kind of scores of 103 or 105 or whatever, way off the scale in terms of being very good, through to being fairly mediocre. I think Tim Shepherd's place, we had some issues there about getting this was all to do with the energy performance certificate, performance numbers for getting the feed-in tariffs and all that kind of stuff sorted out. But yeah, it is slightly frustrating, the fact that you have to do that kind of twin track process. Having said that, because PHPP and the kind of standards that you're building to with Passivhaus is and the standards are so high, you're generally way in excess of building control requirements all the way through. So all of the U values for structure, the thermal performance of the structure is going to be better. Generally, the glazing areas and glazing performance is not going to be problematic unless you're doing really weird stuff. I think in general, I mean, most of the building control officers I've dealt with have been very positive about Passivhaus, because one of the issues with Passivhaus is it's generally about building quality. You can't get good air tightness in buildings if you don't have good quality construction. So when building control officers come round and see every kind of every joint slathered with air tightness tape, and when they see detailing that's done to make sure that there's no thermal bridging, it generally kind of gets a kind of appreciative nod. And I think that building control officers generally realise that if you build it to Passivhaus standards, there is a quality control kind of layer that goes on top of whatever they're looking at on site. So they're generally positive about it. I don't think we've encountered any specific problems with building control, other than with Tim and Marilyn's place actually getting it signed off at the end of it, which I think is more down to the coronavirus and everyone working from home and losing interest in turning up on sites rather than specifically being passive house.
Okay, no, thanks.
Peter.
I've got, okay.
Somebody's asking a question about
We
heating.
have energy certificates.
Sorry, Peter, can you speak up a bit, can't you?
We have, obviously, you get an energy certificate as well, which isn't really building control. But we have one which obviously we get an A rating, but very helpfully at the bottom, whoever did the certificate tells us ways we could improve the energy performance by putting in solar water heating. Well, of course, it's heated solar through the immersion heater. But clearly, also, there's no room left on the roof for any more panels. So you need to educate the whoever's doing your certificate to understand how it works.
Okay.
Not you.
Right, we've got a couple of questions here. So I've got the next question down, which is from Katerina again. So I'm an architect doing the AECB course, and it seems that most homeowners don't know how to change the settings of their new systems installed, such as MVHR systems, which results in incorrect use of the systems, leading to overheat or moisture. Question for that's probably a Brian question. Brian, are you happy to pick up on that one? Do you want to just say who you are as well?
Yeah, I'm Brian Singleton. I've been involved in MVHR systems for over 20 years, primarily with a company called ADM. I'm interested in all the components, which is why I'm here today. And I like to get feedback from clients on projects that we've been involved in. We're involved in all three of the projects and have done others with Phil as well. So yeah, in terms of how the system's set up, Phil showed a snapshot of an MVHR design, which is all done, which tells you where the unit is, where your ducts are, where the things in the rooms are. But more importantly, behind that design, there is an air change schedule. It has to hit the PHPP airflow requirement, and also the Part F if it's England and Wales, or the equivalent in Scotland. So behind every design there should be a detailed project-specific room-by-room air change schedule. So a duty is calculated for the house. So let's, sorry to bore you with our jargon, but let's say that's 100 liters a second or 50 liters a second, whatever it is, that is volume of air. That is split over the house, all of your extract side and your supply side. So if it's 50 liters a second out, it's 50 liters a second in, and that's spread over all of the extract points in the house. So your kitchen, bathroom, en suites, whatever. When the system's commissioned and balanced, those duties are measured on a room-by-room basis with an airflow meter, and then those valves in those rooms are locked and set off and set. So that is it for that room. The only other thing you may want to do is increase the speed of the system, which you can do manually, or it can be automatically on moisture. Or you may want to actually turn the system down. If you're not in the house all of the time, you can set schedules and you reduce the amount of volume of air. So in terms of adjusting things or fiddling with the system, as some people will, some people won't, is it's fairly simple thing to do, to change speeds manually or set up schedules.
Just a kind of a supplementary comment on that. One of the things that we found on a number of our schemes, in which Brian was involved with then, was the fact that certainly in the UK, systems initially have to be set up and commissioned for building regulations requirements in terms of airflow rates, which tend to be relatively high because they tend to assume that you've got a house which doesn't have particularly high standards of insulation or doesn't have anything better than, for example, double glazing. You're therefore wanting to shunt a fair amount of air around in order to make sure that you don't get condensation, that you don't get condensation on windows, you don't get condensation on thermal bridges in the house and stuff like that. With passive house, because you don't have the risk of condensation on windows, you don't have thermal bridges, and you therefore are less worried about moisture in the air. What we found was that, particularly with houses which were fairly large houses with fairly low levels of occupation, was that they were over ventilated, and so we got Brian to come back and take a look at the houses afterwards. And I'm assuming there's nobody from building control here, which would be put your hands over ears if there are. We got the houses recommissioned so that we brought the ventilation levels down, the base level ventilation down a bit, which is basically then just simply shunting less air through the house and throwing less heat away, but while still retaining, as Brian says, the boost functions on the ventilation system, so that if, for example, moisture is detected, you have a shower or whatever, the system would still kick in and would shunt more air around. Does that kind of pick up on that? Okay, that's great.
It's worth mentioning, Phil, that the MEHRs have their own internal sensors. So I think some of them have humidity sensors only, some of them have humidity or CO2 sensors. So going back to the earlier point, you want to fiddle with it, but actually if it's set to work on the sensors, you don't need to do it. If you start cooking or if you're in the bathroom, it'll automatically detect the humidity and it'll boost up.
Pretty much the only fiddling you need to do is just checking the filters once every whatever it tells you to do, whether that's a 6-monthly check or whatever, and either changing or cleaning the filters. But provided the system has been designed so that's reasonably easy to get to, then that shouldn't be too problematic. We've had a question about the type of heating. So in this question from David, do you want to say anything more about this, David? If not, I'll just read it out, which basically says, so looks like we can achieve passive house standard, so we need some supplementary heating. So I'd be interested to hear any comments about the relative merits of underfloor heating, post-heating on the mechanical ventilation system, or infrared panels.
Well, I'll just add a little bit to that then.
Go for it, David.
We're at a very early stage. Our architects put something into pre-planning. The situation we're in is non-ideal. The constraints of the site, where our best views are to the north and to the west, not to the south, and also the form factor that we are coming up with because of the constraints is not ideal, and a house big enough for the family, but only 2 of us living in it. So that's the kind of background, but he's done the initial PHPP analysis, and that suggests that we're just reaching passive house standard. So that's good, but we'll likely need something to boost the heating, and obviously towel rails in the bathrooms and so on. But the kind of 3 obvious routes to kind of go, I suppose, have different advantages. I mean, if we decided we wanted to put in a little bit of underfloor heating, that warms your feet. If we decided to put post heaters on MVHR, then that warms the air. If we put infrared panels, that warms your skin. It'd be interesting just to hear anybody's experience of using any of those, because we're talking about comfort levels as well as warmth levels, what people's experience and relative advantages and disadvantages might be.
Great stuff. Come on, folks.
Shall I lead off?
Go for it, Tim. Yeah.
We were complete mavericks, I'm afraid, on this one. So it's just our experience rather than what we were advised to do. But we ignored post heater and towel rails, and we went for underfloor throughout. We really love our underfloor heating in our bathroom and ensuite. The towels dry anyway, so if you're not bothered about having a warm towel, which it's dry, it's at 20 degrees, I would definitely say go for underfloor heating in your wet areas, and it's really lovely going into a bathroom in your bare feet in the winter. That's great. We also went for underfloor heating in our ground floor, and that's been good in the sense that it does seem to, because it's cast into the screed, this is electric underfloor heating rather than water, hot water. And we heat it up overnight on off-peak electricity, and that keeps our living area downstairs great, and that's been a great success. The downside that we found is that heat does not move around the house. I was always taught at school that hot air rises, but it doesn't seem to work in Passivhaus. It just stays around. So our upstairs tends to be a couple of degrees lower than downstairs, which is not a great problem, but occasionally we do sort of get the fan heater out on really cold days and just warm up the space upstairs, which of course, if we put a post heater in, we would have had the same temperature in all areas. But as I say, went out on a limb with that. We're not unhappy with the outcome. We certainly, when we do need heat, it's off-peak rates rather than peak electricity rates. So it's pros and cons for us.
Tim Shepherd, do you want to put your view on it, because yours is a different system there, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got the opposite. We've got towel rail heaters and a pole heater in the MVHR. And again, because I've got no other experience and it works. We've not had a problem with cold floors because the house is at 19, 20 degrees, when it's cold outside. We've got it now set up that the towel rails come on automatically when the temperature falls below 19 in one particular room, so that we can actually then get it on rather than having to do it manually. There is a bit of a lag time, I suppose, and that it takes a while before, once the heaters come on, if the temperatures drop below 19 and it's really cold snap, but we haven't had that yet, to actually experience. Yeah, we don't have cold feet though. I must say that. I mean, right now I'm in a t-shirt, so and I don't want to. It's about 6 degrees outside, so that's our experience.
Just from my experience here, so ours isn't Passivhaus, but because we had slightly higher heating demands, we ended up putting a little bit more in the way, and so we've got heated towel rails in bathroom and 2 toilets, plus post heater on ventilation system, plus just a little bit of electric underfloor, basically where your feet are going to go. So underneath where you stand in the kitchen and underneath where your feet go on the sofa. And I've got a thermal imaging photograph here, which I'll just put up here, which shows the hot patch on the floor where our cat has been lying, and the very hot back end of cat disappearing on the left hand side of that image, having been sat there, laid down there for a while. The beast spends much of her time on the heated underfloor and much enjoys it. So if you're a cat or dog owner, I'm sure you'd have a friend for life there if you didn't already by simply putting a bit of underfloor in. Any other thoughts on heating tab?
Yeah. I guess just going back on Tim's point about there is a difference in the different floors. So ours is an upside down house, and upstairs is generally 1 or 2 degrees higher than downstairs. So which helps us because, I mean, during the day we're upstairs, it's warmer. The bedrooms are a bit cooler, which is what we like. In terms of heating, we have the towel rails and we have the underfloor heating. We don't. I think going back to discussions we had, Phil, yeah, we way over specified, didn't really need them. Yes, you're right.
There were lengthy discussions on this.
Yes, but I think it's all a case of, amount of money you've got to spend. So if money is not an issue, then I would say wet underfloor heating, just from the comfort factor. You won't use it very often, but when you do, it'll be nice. And yeah, I think radiators or infrared are good for the heating, but the actual quality of the heat is not quite as good. So that'd just be my experience.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, that's great. Anybody else want to chip in on that? Peter?
Yeah, we've got the same as Tim, basically a post heater and 3 towel rails. And when we moved in, we were going to we wanted more for visual effect, a coal effect electric heater, which is opposite where we're sitting now, and we got it offered a second-hand one, very cheap. So we bought that. It was out of the box, but it was only £50. It has never worked. It has never given us any heat at all. And I keep meaning to fix it, but it's been nearly 3 years now, and I haven't bothered. A couple of times a year, we put a blow heater on. But yeah, if it was a problem, then I would have got it fixed by now.
Yeah, for those of you that are sharp-eyed amongst you, will see there's where is it? An electric heater sat in the corner of my office here. My office is kind of detached from the house and is effectively a kind of passive house spec box hooked up to the house's mechanical ventilation system, but with no other heating. And what I find in here is that basically body heat plus my computer, which is chuffing away under the desk, plus a few other bits of kit, keep the place perfectly comfortable. The only issue is it cools down a bit overnight, so I simply have the electric heater on a timer, so it comes on for a couple of hours low between about 5 a.m. and when the really cheap electricity stops about 7, and then that's it for the day. So I think this as Tim said earlier, in some ways it's kind of what heating you use becomes much less critical because you're using very little of it. This house here is not passive house. It's a Victorian house retrofitted with a couple of extensions on it. And because we knew that our heating needs were going to be slightly higher, and because we'd moved from a very drafty Victorian house, my partner was very insistent that we should have a wood burner at the end of the living room, which we do have a wood burner there. We've been here now 2.5 years. We've lit it twice. In each case, we put 2 hot blocks on it, those things about the size of a brick, and burned them. And then that was that. So we decided that was quite warm enough, thank you. And it hasn't been used for any use other than that, other than simply looking very attractive at the end of the living room and giving a focus to the room. So I think certainly it's very easy to kind of come into passive house kind of with your previous expectations about what kind of, what central heating is about or what focal heating is all about. And wildly over specify in passive house where you really, really do need very little. So yes. Right, we've got a question. Jamie, thanks for that. Do you want to put this to people particularly? Go for it.
Hello, I'm just wondering if any of the occupants suffered with any sort of respiratory issues such as asthma or any conditions like that, and whether you felt an improvement in your health since actually living in a passive house.
Great stuff, thank you. Anybody want to pick that one up? They're all looking.
I can start there, Phil.
Yeah, go for it, Tab.
Yeah, so yeah, Jamie, I used to have lots of issues with sinus pain, and it was triggered off a lot by pollen or any sort of strong smells or fibers in the air. I think since we moved here, I think the filtered ventilation plus the fact that we don't have carpets means actually, and the fact that there's a lack of drafts, I think it's all combined with, I think I've generally seen a significant improvement. So I tend to get less sinusitis and head pains than I used to.
Excellent.
Great,
I've got a photo here actually, which I'll just show you since it's on my screen, which is of the lovely Brian, in fact, peering into a very murky looking filter on this filters in Peter and Margot's place. Brian, do you want to say anything about that? I mean, I think you immediately start feeling much better as soon as you realise what's been caught up in the filters and therefore not up your nose. So any thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, yes, and Jamie, there is direct links to, keeping moisture levels down, which denies things like the horrible things that live in pillows and things, creating problems with people. Dust mites, that's the word I was looking for. But in terms of the filtration, the filter I think in my hand is the extract one. So that is a grade 4. The higher the figure in filtration, the better the filtration. You only really need a grade 4 on the extract side because you're just trying to keep the heat exchanger inside the unit clean. On the supply side, you have an F7. That is to 10, 20 times more efficient than the 4. Takes out microns down to like 0.1 of a size. So that pretty much takes almost all your pollen type spores out before it gets into the system. So you have a far greater or superior filter on the supply air, which obviously impacts on people who have respiratory problems living in the house.
Great stuff. Thanks,
Also,
Brian.
I was going to say, also, because it's a passive house, the incidence of mold shouldn't exist. So mold spores are one of the primary causes of asthma attacks.
There was a comment from Greg about passive house retrofit and why suffering from insomnia, but that not being an issue due to fresh air and quiet of passive house. I think that's an interesting one. I think certainly one of the things that we noticed here is that because we're living in kind of triple glazed, very well insulated environment, it can be the outside weather can be doing whatever it's doing, and you have absolutely no idea what's going on apart from seeing trees thrashing around outside your windows. And certainly traffic noise, stuff like that. Our favourite story here, and I'll give the rest of you a chance to speak, but is that when next door neighbours moved in, they decided to try out the fireplaces in their house and managed to set fire to the chimney. But we didn't know this until the morning after, where the lass next door came out and said, "I'm really sorry about the noise last night." We came out saying, having slept straight through the night, saying, "What noise last night?" I said, "Well, there was a fire engine parked up outside your bedroom window for about 2 hours at 1 a.m. last night. We hadn't heard it." So I do think that, yes, I mean, this kind of thing about calm, certainly doing passive house in urban locations, but even in rural locations, just this fact that you're kind of constantly, you're very aware of what's going on outside because you can see it through the windows, and if rooms are designed to kind of link you to the outside, you get that connection. But you don't get the stress of noise. If you really want to hear birdsong, then just crack a window open. But the rest of the time, if you want it quiet, you can really have it quiet. Any other comments from passive house residents on that side of things? Okay. Do we have any other questions? Because we're just about up to our hour's worth. Happy to talk. If people have got questions and queries, then do fire away. Okay, we've got a question here from Amar saying, after a bit of Googling, I was seeing an MVHR which is combined with a heat pump in one unit. And does anyone have any experience with this type of unit? I don't. Brian, is this anything that you've encountered in terms of doing installations?
There are products around. We don't do them, but there are companies around. I believe that it's a very, very expensive way to do things, but yeah, there is stuff on the market. Whether it's passive house approved component, I don't really know. I could look that up, but I suspect they probably are. But I think it's an option potentially. But as I say, how it fits in with the PHPP fill, I have no experience of it.
I guess one of the issues. Sorry, Jamie.
Go on. I was going to say, with regard to like mechanical ventilation and so forth, Brian, would you recommend that, if you're doing passive house, it's good to really use products that are certified?
Well, yeah, they have to be, Jamie. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We deal with all sorts of companies, and a lot of the companies we deal with do not have passive house recognized products because they're not really active in mainland Europe or other parts of the world where there are more passive house projects. But yeah, it certainly has to be a certified component, and there is a quite exhaustive component database that's in the public domain for all sorts of equipment, windows right the way through to mechanical ventilation. So it's something you can look up yourself and see how they've been tested. But yes, it has to be an accredited and approved by the Passivhaus Institute.
The question about heat pumps is an interesting one, because I guess one of the common factors between the three schemes that we've kind of talked through this morning is that we, in all cases, went for direct electric heating on them, which is very much kind of these days, direct electric is still a bit kind of, ooh, but because the heating requirements were so low, this kind of didn't feel problematic. So the heating load on each of the certainly on Tim's and Peter's houses, so the worst case in winter heating load was basically around about 1 kilowatt, and so our feeling on that was that in those kind of situations, going for air source heat pump would be an overly complex situation, or going for ground source heat pumps would be overly complex, and so simply putting in electric heating to pick up that demand, particularly on houses where they had very extensive solar photovoltaic arrays, so they were cranking out an awful lot of electricity, and where in both cases they were designed so that they could incorporate battery storage at some point in the future in order to make sure that electricity wasn't simply shutting in and out to the grid. But it'll be interesting to see how things progress, certainly in the UK, where we're kind of grappling with this kind of long-term issue around how do we decarbonize the grid while at the same time dealing with the existing building stock we've got in the country, which is mainly shocking in terms of heating requirements, and where we're still building houses today which are going to have to be retrofitted in the very near future. But where we do need to, even with buildings which are relatively low energy consumption, look at ways of pulling them down further still if we can. Right, any other questions? Anybody got anything burning they want to ask or say? Okay. Jamie, you had a question about whether there's going to be any other stuff around Passivhaus and Wellbeing. I'm not sure. I haven't had a look at the IPHA full program for the next few days, but if there isn't, but if you think it's something it'd be interesting to hear more about, then be happy to kind of lean on them a bit and see what else we could get done. I mean, this session came out, as I said, from the videos that Tim and Marilyn and Tim and JJ made about their houses, along with Peter and Margot. Really from the subjective side of things, in that much as we talk, and as an architect I love talking about the technicalities of it, but on the other hand there's this purely subjective kind of thing about why are they just such lovely places to be in, that we felt was worth talking about. And I'm sure that there's probably some more science to be unpicked in amongst that, but none of us are scientists, but we all felt it was worth at least putting out there this kind of issue around what's the subjective side of this. And for the kind of numbers nerds like me, it's really useful just to kind of come back down to reality and think this is how people experience these buildings, and ultimately that's what's most important for the client. So yeah, thank you to all of you from my bunch of clients who are here today, and thanks Brian for your inputs into today. If we don't have any other burning questions, then I'll say thank you very, very much for being here. I will do a blog on this. It will go up on my website, which is www.constructiveindividuals.co.uk, and I'll try and make sure that points to wherever the video of this event gets posted. It'll either be on my YouTube channel or on the IPHA YouTube channel. And if there is anything else interesting that crops up that I can point you out afterwards, I'll try and make sure I do so through that website. So thanks again for attending. Thanks especially to those of you who've managed to keep awake far into the night, or as I say, leapt out of bed in the wee small hours. And thanks also to my esteemed clients for turning up, and for Tim and Marilyn for the presentation you did. I'll make sure that gets publicly available as well. Many thanks, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.